Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are continuing our series on the Genealogical Proof Standard. If you've missed the first two videos, you're probably going to want to go ahead and watch them. The first one is called Genealogical Proof Standard and Overview, and the second one is the Genealogical Proof Standard, a reasonably exhaustive search. Today we are talking about complete and accurate citation of sources. So I'll start with a quick review of the GPS. We'll talk about why you want to have a complete and accurate citation of your sources, and then we'll talk about how to get those. Okay, so that's what we're going to cover. Let's go ahead and dive in with a review of the Genealogical Proof Standard. Now, the Genealogical Proof Standard comes from the Board for Certification of Genealogists. They have a manual. The new edition, which just came out this year, is Genealogy Standards. If you do not have a copy of this book, I would highly recommend that you get it. It's just a little booklet, and you can get it at their website. The GPS has several parts. Today we'll be looking at the second element, complete and accurate citation of sources. But just for the sake of review, let's just look at all of the elements of the GPS. First is a reasonably exhaustive search. We spoke about that last time. Next is the complete and accurate citation of sources. Third is an analysis and correlation of the collected information. Fourth is resolution of conflicting evidence. That's always my favorite. And fifth is a soundly reasoned, coherently written conclusion. And once you have all of these elements, you can look at any piece of information in your tree or in your family history and have a degree of confidence that you have met the genealogical proof standard for that information. A lot of us, when we first started, got hung up on this first element. We search and search and search, and sometimes our searches, instead of being reasonably exhaustive, become reasonably exhausting. And so this is just to take your skills to the next level. So let's talk about why complete and accurate citation of sources is so very important. Again, this comes directly from the Board for Certification of Genealogists. They state that it demonstrates the extent of the search and the quality of the sources. So you've done your searching, you've located records, sources that have information, sources being things like a census record or a birth certificate or somebody else's tree or a book that was published at a certain time period. Whatever the source may be, okay? Citing that source shows, both to yourself and anybody else who happens to come along after you, children, grandchildren, the extent of the search that you did. That's important because you need to know where that information you're getting comes from. It also demonstrates the quality of that source. So when we do complete source citations, and we'll talk just a minute about what that entails, when we do a complete source citation, it leads us into the third element of the genealogical proof standard, which is analysis of the information. We need to be able to know the quality of the sources we're using. Is this a good source of information? Is this a not so great source of information? Is this a good source for some information and not for other information? Well, we'll talk more about that when we talk about analyzing sources next month. But the source citation you put together to enable you to make that determination. The next thing that BCG says is that it allows others to replicate the steps that you took to reach the conclusion that you reached. Why did you put this birth date down for this person? Okay, well, if you've cited your sources, then somebody else can follow those steps. And here's a pretty bold statement that, again, comes from BCG. The inability to replicate the research casts doubts on the conclusion. And it should do that for you, too. I have things in my tree. I started doing this when I was about 12 years old. I have things in my tree that still do not have source citations because I didn't want to start over. So I've been going back through and documenting or citing all of the sources through which I have collected this information. And it's kind of a tedious process and it takes some time. But in the process of doing that, when I come across a piece of information and I don't have sources, and then I can't replicate the research. And when I can't replicate the research, it makes me question the conclusion. It makes me question why I have this date in my tree, or why I thought this was his wife's name, or why I thought that his children were born in this place when I have no evidence that they actually lived there. Whatever the fact or relationship or event that I have come to a conclusion about in my tree, I need to be able to replicate that research that I did to get to that conclusion. And so that's one of the things that source citation does for me, is it allows me to look at my research and to understand how I came to that conclusion. So for yourself, for those who come after you, I think, I inherited a lot of my family history research, and I'm having to question a lot of it because there is no source citations. If there had been source citations, I could have gone through and checked some of them, or done a random survey of some of them, or even followed every single one of them to determine the accuracy of the information in my tree. But because there's large chunks of my tree in this family history that I inherited that don't have that kind of source citation, I question a lot of it. And in fact, in redoing it, have found that some of it has been wrong. So that's the why you want to do some source citation. There are other reasons why. For me, most particularly, creating or crafting source citations is part of the analysis of that source. And so those two steps, even though they're set apart as two separate elements of the GPS, the source citation and the analysis, for me, they become almost the same step because I'm analyzing the record and the information as I'm creating the source citation. So let's then talk about how you create these source citations. Like all good reporters, there are some basic elements that go into the information that we're sharing with other people, and these should be familiar questions. Who, what, when, and where. If you can answer those questions with a source citation, you've done it well enough. Now, there are a lot of different forms and formats. You'll hear lots of opinions, and of course I have one that I'll share with you, but the important thing is just to get started doing this, and don't get hindered or hung up on what should be capitalized and where the period or the semicolon should go. If that's going to prevent you from citing your sources, I would rather you just did it in a way that works for you than that you didn't do it at all, okay? Now, with that said, let's talk about each of these elements just briefly. So who is going to be, who is responsible for creation of that source, or who was the informant? So for example, if I did an interview with a family member and obtained a bunch of information from them about facts and relationships in the family, they become the who. If I consulted the 1800 U.S. federal census, then the federal government or the National Archives or the U.S. Census Bureau, those become the who, where you get who created that information. What person, this again is from BCG, what person, agency, business, government, office, or religious body authored, created, edited, produced, or was responsible for the source, or if identified, the source's informant. So that who piece of information, just make sure that you include all the elements that answer that question. The next question, of course, is what. In this case, you're just going to put the title of whatever the source is. Or if it's not a titled, the Missouri State birth certificate, or whatever the title is, what is it that you're looking at? What is the source that you're consulting? If it doesn't have a title, and some of the sources we consult don't, then in that case, you're going to need to describe what it is. Describe the source that you're using. Next is when, and that's going to be, like, there's lots of whens, right? When was this source created? When was the source published? When did you access the source? Okay, so not this is not a one-to-one relationship here. There can be many who's, there can be many whens. Try to answer that question in as many ways as possible when you're creating your source citations. So when was the source created? When was it published? When did you access it? Those are the kinds of questions that you're trying to answer. Next, or finally here then, is where. So where is this information held? Is it online at Ancestry.com in a specific database? Is it in a particular archive or library? Is it on a particular reel of microfilm? Did you access this through a specific website for a state government agency? What's the URL of that? Okay, so where is this information and where did you access it? Those are the questions that you're answering when you create a source citation. So this is the how of creating a source citation. You want to make sure you've answered every one of these questions. Okay, now let's just look at a few places where you can go to get some additional help or some examples on how to do this for yourself. So first off, I'm going to direct you to the BCG website. It's bcgcertification.org. So this is the Board for Certification of Genealogists, but whether you want to become a certified genealogist or not, they have some amazing resources available that anybody can access. So here they have the listing of the GPS with all of the elements and the descriptions about how that element contributes to credibility. Over here on the left-hand side, you're going to see some links. One of those links is to work samples. And I love this because what you're going to find in here are case studies and proof arguments in varying degrees of length and difficulty by some of the top genealogists in the country. And you can look at them as examples. So the one I've pulled up here is from Dr. Thomas Jones, who actually is the editor of the Genealogy Standards Manual. And he has this case study here that you can read. And at the bottom of every page, what you're going to see are his footnotes or his source citations. So you're going to see information. I probably could make this a little bigger here. Let's just zoom in, okay? So if I zoom in here to his footnotes, you're going to see some examples here of the questions being answered. So the questions, remember, again, are who, what, where, and when. So we see all of those questions then are answered in each of his footnotes or his source citations for this, this information that he's written down and for the conclusions that he's drawing based on that information. So one of the things that I find myself doing very often, I took a week-long course from Dr. Jones at the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy this last winter. He taught a week-long class in advanced genealogy methodologies. It was fabulous, but he gave us homework every night. And one of the things that I found myself doing, and I don't know if he suggested it or if it was just something I just started doing, very often before I would read the text of the narrative or the text here that he would give us in some of these case studies that he had us look at, I would go through and just read the footnotes for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to know what kinds of records he was using because I wanted to learn more about the different kinds of records. I wanted to understand where the information he was going to share came from. Two, because he's a master at this, and so I wanted these examples kind of burned into my brain because I'm terrible at crafting pretty source citations. I cite all of the stuff that I find, but my source citations are not always in a pretty format. And so I wanted to start to become familiar with the language of source citations. So I just read and read and read all of the footnotes before, and I would just do that, like go page by page and just come down here and read the footnotes. And I did that over and over and over through that week as he gave us case studies and different things to look at before I would go and then read the narrative that he had written about the research that he was doing. So super useful. Go through and see how some of the the hard hitters do it. But again, it's kind of like learning a new language. You dive into this immersion program almost, and you start becoming familiar with the language of source citations, and it becomes less scary, and you start to recognize certain words and phrases and pieces and formats, and then the more time you spend with it, the more familiar it becomes, and then next thing you know, you're speaking some of that language, and so immerse yourself in excellent source citations, and Dr. Jones is certainly one who is a master at it. Now, you may have noticed, if I come back down here, this particular article that is used as an example on the BCG website is from a publication. It actually came from the National Genealogical Society's quarterly. The NGS publishes they do a quarterly publication. And I love, it's like Christmas Day when I get that publication. Again, it's an opportunity for me to learn from some of the best genealogists about what kind of sources they're using, how they're using those sources, what information they're extracting from those sources, how they're analyzing that information, and how they're putting it all together to draw conclusions about identity of individuals, about relationships between individuals, and about facts and events in any individual or family life. So if you are a member of the National Genealogical Society or want to become a member, that quarterly then becomes available to you as part of your membership. So besides the BCG website, check out the NGS website to sign up as a member of that and receive a copy of that quarterly. Now, we can't talk about source citations without talking about Elizabeth Shown Mills. If you're not familiar with her work, if Dr. Jones is the king, then Elizabeth is the queen of family history research, and certainly she is the queen of source citation. So she has a book. Her book is Evidence Explained. Historical Analysis, Citation, and Source Usage is the tagline here on her website. The subtitle of her book is Citing History Sources from Artifacts to Cyberspace. I have a copy of this book, a well-used copy of this book. She also has quick sheets that she sells that are laminated, double-sided. Actually, I think it's a folded, so it's 4 pages, laminated quick sheet that I keep on my desk so that I have access to examples of how to cite sources. She also has a website. It's evidenceexplained.com, and she shares examples. She is so generous with the information that she shares. Yes, you can purchase her book, and I encourage you to do so, but one of the things that I so respect about her is that she just wants to elevate the research that all of us are doing as genealogists. And so she's so generous with sharing information, whether you buy her book or not. And so one of the things you're going to find here on her website is sample quick check models. I've used these as examples for other people where I share them. So for example, if you need to know how to cite a census database online, you can click that, and here is an example from her book of a quick check model that shows you how to craft or create that particular source citation. And so then you just, it's kind of like those, this is going to be a terrible comparison, but it's kind of like those old Mad Libs. Like you'd have a blank field or a blank line, and it would tell you what you were to put in that specifically. And it's a noun, it's a verb, it's an adjective, and you just fill in the blanks. Well, that's what she's done for us here. Is she's created these quick check models that are fill in the blank. Now she gives you examples of what that might look like but you can, you put in the information for yourself. The compiler, the database title, the item type or format, the website creator or owner, the website title, the URL, the year. She gives you all of the information that you need, the item of interest, the date you accessed it, the credit line, okay? She gives you all of the blanks that you need to fill in to craft any kind of source citation. So like I said, she does have sample quick check models here on her website that address a few of the more popular kinds of source citations. But if you want the full enchilada, you're going to need to order a copy of her book, and I would strongly encourage you to do that. Now, on Ancestry.com, and we'll just wrap up with this, every time you attach a record, it is creating a source citation for you. Okay, so again, I don't want people to get overwhelmed or think that this is something that's got to take a ton of time, or like, I just want you to get in the habit of making sure that you are citing your sources. And if this is where you start, then this is where you start. So here is an example. This is my second great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. And if you scroll down here on the right-hand side, you'll see the sources that have been attached to him, okay? And you'll also see when you look here at any fact, it has sources attached, okay? So source citations are being created on Ancestry.com anytime you attach a record. If you would like to review or edit any of those sources, the easiest way to do that is to click here on the Facts and Sources tab. And let me just scroll down just a little bit. Again, here you're going to see this. The default view is by fact or event, but there is also here a way to view by source citation. So I can click on that, and now here are my source citations from Ancestry.com, from the records that I've attached. So I can view them. Okay, I can come in here and I can see exactly what the citation information is that was created. So in this case, I've got the information about the database, that it's online, that's my where. I have the year, that's a when. I have a census location, that's a where. I have a microfilm roll and page number for the original, okay, and an image number then for the digital. And then I have, so there's just some basic information. Oh, and then I have the repository information because this was accessed on Ancestry.com. So there is some basic source citation information that's automatically created for you whenever you attach a record. Now, if you would like to add additional information to that, you can. You can edit any source citation that is automatically created on Ancestry.com. You can come in here and you can add additional transcription of information of the text. So if I wanted to transcribe additional details that are on the census, I could put that in there. If I wanted to add any additional information, and this is information specifically related to the citation. So for example, if my great-grandfather was at the bottom of a census page and the ink was smudged and two members of the household, I couldn't even read their names, this might be the place where I would put that other information. We're talking about information directly related to this particular source or this particular source citation. And then in this case, it also tells me which facts about his life this particular source deals with. So I can edit any citation that is automatically created when I attach a record. Of course, I can also then view the record. I hope you're all viewing the record and the original image. If you want to review the source information, when you're on this record page, it's always going to be just right here. Here's the source citation that will be created before, if you want to review it before you attach it. There is also a little Learn More button here on the source citation page. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to read this. It's just a quick tutorial in what's a source and how do you work with sources that are automatically created and how do you create sources for information that you access elsewhere. Some really great information in this article here about source citations that I encourage you to read. One last thing here, if I just come back to my source citation, my complete list, I also have the ability to add a source citation. So these ones are created automatically for me by the program when I attach a record. I may or may not want to edit them to make them fit my own personal style or to update or enhance the information included in that source citation. But very often I find information offline. So census records and some birth, marriage, and death records. There's some excellent records online at Ancestry.com. But there are some records about this particular great-grandfather of mine that are not available online. Maybe there's a family Bible Maybe I have a photograph that has some information written on it. Maybe I interviewed my grandfather who told me a story about his grandfather. That's who this is. And I want to make sure I record that information. Whatever the other sources are that you access or that you use to tell the story that lend to identity or relationships or events in a person's life, you're going to want to create a source citation. So we give you the ability here to add a source citation, and you can then just craft your own citation. And we've provided you some basic fill-in-the-blank information in order to do that. So you can just come here and fill in the information about the title and the date and transcription of the information, other information about the source, if it's a web address, whatever. The source citations on your online tree are going to be fairly basic. If you have Family Tree Maker, there are some additional options that make that source citation process a little bit more robust. There's more fields to fill in. There's more opportunity to include additional information. There's some cleaner, better formatting for all of that information. And one of my favorite things about the Family Tree Maker software source citation is that it allows me to rate my sources. Again, I do a lot of that analysis of source citations as part of the citation process itself. I kind of blend those two things. So that is your introduction to source citations. Hopefully, if you have never created a source before, you'll go take a look at the sources being created as you attach records. If you have created sources before, hopefully this has encouraged you to continue to do so, and maybe to make sure that you're including all of the necessary information that you need to in those source citations. Again, remember the whys that we do it. We cite those sources specifically so that we can retrace our steps, right? Whether it's us retracing our own steps or our grandson retracing those steps 40 years from now, or the researcher who's looking at our tree online tomorrow. Okay, we're doing this so that our steps can be retraced, because if we can't replicate the research, there's doubts cast on our conclusions. It also demonstrates the extent to which we have used the right sources and enough sources, and that the information that we're getting to make some of these conclusions that we're going to make is as exhaustive as possible. So it kind of combines reasonably exhaustive search, and it combines a little bit of analysis, and hopefully you'll want to dive in a little bit more to citing your sources completely and accurately. That's all I have prepared for you today. If you're watching this at our regularly scheduled time, I will be on chat in just a few minutes to answer any additional questions you may have about this topic. Or you can join us on our Facebook group and ask questions, or post here on the YouTube channel if you're watching it on YouTube. In the comments, we'll keep an eye on those as well. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.